The motorbike and sidecar outfit is one of the most enduring images of the lightning speed of German blitzkrieg warfare. As far back as 1937, the German military had asked two companies, first Zundap and later BMW, to design a heavy-duty motorbike and sidecar combination that could handle any terrain. The two companies developed incredible technical innovations, but their relationship was marked by bitter corporate rivalry.
In the 1930s, it took Hitler's global aspirations to turn mechanical warfare into an awesome reality. Heinz Guderian, the father of modern blitzkrieg or lightning warfare, knew that he had to get troops armed and equipped up to the front as quickly as possible, and he needed the right machines to do it.
As a stunt coordinator, I've worked with World War II military vehicles of the movie business for over 30 years. I also collect wheels of war, but I've always had a special passion for these big motorbike and sidecar outfits.
This is the BMW R12, essentially a pre-war civilian machine adapted for use by the German army with the addition of a few bits and pieces and 3 men with their weaponry. Fine for going on the road, but the moment you came off the road and the weather was a bit adverse, you had a problem. It had its real limitations. The BMW R12 and its Zundap equivalents just didn't cut it with the army. They needed something specifically designed for the job. First of all, they needed two-wheel drive, which would give phenomenal cross-country performance. Secondly, that had to have a differential. That differential was lockable, again, to increase that cross-country performance. A reverse gear. If you get into a firefight, you want to be able to get out quickly and not have to pull this great monster around. A low-ratio gearbox, again, more cross-country performance. Hydraulic forks, a great comfortable ride across country and meant the steering was a lot more positive. And finally, hydraulic brakes to be able to stop such a brutal machine.
Hitler cultivated the image of the might of Germany's mechanized fighting force. This propaganda newsreel gives a false impression. The reality was that at the start of World War II, the Wehrmacht was 80% horse-drawn. They needed a quick fix. In theory, cheap and easy to mass produce, large motorbikes could be used to get heavily armed troops rapidly into forward positions.
This is part of the vast training ground south of Berlin, where these vehicles would have been brought by the manufacturers to be approved by the army for manufacture. The R75s and the KS750s would have been put through a variety of obstacles at this location, everything from mud to water to slopes, and if they got the tick of approval, they would have been sent off to the various theatres of war.
During his time at Zundap, Gunter Sengfelder knew the passionate engineers who developed the prototypes for the KS750.
Well, I have some pictures here from the tests in Austria.
So this was a test with Zundap personnel and the army?
Mostly it was army personnel. Zundap sent their only mechanics and one test driver if there were problems with the bikes to repair them. And they had to test the bikes in a very rough countryside. And the tests went on for several days. In December, it was very cold.
And have you got any of the results of those tests anywhere? Do you know
Well,
what the military thought initially?
Yeah, in this brochure, which was made by Zundap in the 40s, and here it says that there was a final discussion after the tests, and it says here that the test showed the absolute, the word absolute is written here, superiority of the Zundap outfit. And they asked Mr. Schleicher, who was technical director from BMW, to produce the Zundap bike. But the BMW people said, no, we never produce a Zundap.
This for me is fascinating. I didn't realise that the Zundap design was considered far superior to the design that the BMW had put forward. BMW then refused to build Zundap's design, and they said, we will make our own bike. This must have made the whole program a great deal more expensive.
I don't think at that time that the price of a product was very important, but another important thing was the time. They couldn't start the production because they gave BMW time to improve their bikes and then test them again against the Zundap.
And this is what the two manufacturers came up with. The BMW R75 and the Zundap KS750. All fitted with those innovative features which the Army had asked for. Now they had a machine that could really perform. They could take men with machine guns, they could take stores, they could fit radios, and most of all, they could get to where they needed to go. This was the ultimate machine for them.
But BMW's refusal to adopt a rival company's design meant that the bikes didn't start coming off the production lines until the summer of 1941. A vital year had been lost for the Wehrmacht, and yet, because of the need for two bikes with interchangeable parts, BMW's R75 was almost identical in the end to the original Zundap KS750. But both were still fantastic machines.
Now that's what they were made for. This is the kind of ground where they really earned their money. Not many vehicles of that period, even four-wheeled vehicles, would get up that slope. And there they are, full speed, up they go, but skill of the riders was most important here. Now this is what it's all about. Now you're getting the real appreciation of what two-wheel drive and a much better ground clearance and a bit of real low-down grunt can give you. I'm in this low gear now, and I feel that I could almost go anywhere. And although I've got to really concentrate to hold it, without that two-wheel drive, I would have stopped way back. This is really cutting the mustard as far as I'm concerned. And there really wasn't another motorcycle and sidecar outfit of the period that could perform like either of these two machines. One of the extraordinary innovations about this bike, which is almost unique, was the breathing system for the carburetors, which allowed it to wade through really quite deep water. The carburetor breathing tubes originally went to an air cleaner directly under the tank here, but in the desert they found that all the dust from the front wheel would clog it up extremely quickly. So they made this modification where the tube comes up, goes right the way through the petrol tank, through a large felt bellows here, which you could clean out at night, get all the sand and the rubbish out of it, and put it back on. "60 years on, and the bike still does the most extraordinary job cross-country. The power-to-weight ratio of the gearbox against the engine, against the traction from those two rear wheels, is quite extraordinary. The front forks sort out the bumps, and the steering was light as a feather. When they went off to war, they must have felt they were going off with the best machinery that the factories could provide them with. But of course, that's not the end of the story.
The motorbike and sidecar outfit designed by Zundap and BMW in the 1940s was one of the most advanced pieces of military engineering built during the Second World War. Gunter Sengfelder worked for Zundap in Nuremberg for over 20 years.
This is the only building of the former Zundap factory which still looks the same as on the picture in 1935. And here was the management department, and all the people who developed the KS750 worked in this building. And they made the blueprints, they made the drawings, and then they came to the test department where all the parts were made by hand and the bikes were tested. And behind was the construction bureau, and then the halls where the KS 750 were produced. 18,000 were produced in the factory here during the war.
So it would have been a very busy place then.
Indeed, it was a busy place.
Yes, I'll
and
bet.
they worked for 60 hours a week.
60 hours?
Yes, it was a normal working time during the war.
Altogether, the two companies produced almost 35,000 motorbike and sidecar outfits. But not just anyone could ride these incredibly powerful machines. It required a lot of skill to move between the gears and master the lockable differential. And in the field, cooperation between rider and sidecar passenger was vital. Kurt Ockert was a dispatch rider with the 2nd Parachute Regiment. And it wasn't just the riders who needed to know what they were doing.
But it stood the test.
Commandos, like Harry Mertz, received special training to ride in the sidecars.
The training I had was in Kosny, about 200 kilometers from Paris. And there was over a dozen bikes there. Well, we wasn't the riders itself, we was the passengers, you might say. And we had to go in the sidecar, and the rider there, he was a very clever fellow. First, when we went, they give us a stick, they trying to frighten us. On the dirt flying, you know, they really lifted us. And when you're not an experienced rider, you do get a wind up.
Those pictures are from the driving school in Helmstedt. I spent two years there. Those are the pictures where we had a Volkswagen for test almost to destruction. We went round and round a disused sand pit, driving like lunatics to see if we could wreck the thing.
And
But
did
it
you?
stood the test.
Did you do that with motorcycles as well?
Partly, yes, because we had plenty of opportunity there. And of course, as a motorcyclist, you always feel you want to go off the road to test the things,
Yes,
isn't
yes,
it?
yes, yes.
Anybody can drive along the road, but to get off the road, that's where the real fun comes in. Now, this is in Rome. The trouble was down there were so many ants, and they would climb up the trees and go across a hammock. There was nowhere to have a good night's sleep, except in the sidecar. Those ants didn't like the smell of the hot rubber. It's the only place where you could have a good night's sleep. We had one interpreter from the Vatican. It was my job to take him to the Vatican, and there he went in to meet his fellow priests. He had a German uniform on. A priest came out and said, "Come and wait in here." So I went in. He was a nice man. He gave me some bread, fresh bread, and some great wine. And I had quite a good time.
And you carried him in the sidecar?
I carried him back in the sidecar. He was sober, mind you. But I felt quite hot.
But at the front, the nearest workshop could be hundreds of miles away. The men who used these bikes had to be skilled mechanics and good riders. Deep in the heart of the Bavarian countryside, Uli Leuscher lovingly rebuilds BMW R75s.
What do you like about this engine?
Well, I personally like it is a very well designed engine, and it is good for repair, and it is reliable.
That's what I like about them. I've had mine for 20 years and it's still running very well.
Look, I play around with these things for over 32 years now. And after the 32 years, I start to love it.
The BMW frame, the Zundap frame. Will you tell me what the advantages and the disadvantages are of the two different systems?
The Zundap frame is a single piece, and it is very difficult to repair. The BMW frame, it is made out of 6 parts, so you can easily open it or disassemble and change any part. For instance, when you have engine problem, you can open it, you pull the lever, open it to the top, and easily you can open and take out the engine and gearbox.
This is the heart of the whole machine. All built into this, we have the kickstart, we have the foot gear selector here, which works correspondingly with a hand change up on the tank. We have the differential lock bar, which would go right the way back here to the differential and lock it if necessary. The clutch actuator, the output shaft from the gearbox, which is mounted on a huge, great rubber donut here. Here we have this innovation, absolute innovation. In order to stop a machine of this size, hydraulic brakes, never, to my knowledge, ever fitted on any other motorcycle before.
Nope.
All contained in this unit and made with correspondingly similar parts which would fit the Zundap and the R75.
They are the same, absolutely.
The lockable differential is the really clever part of the machine. The drive shaft from the gearbox comes into here, transfers 60% of the power to the rear wheel here, and 40% from here into the sidecar wheel. If you get into really deep mud, lock the differential, and suddenly you get 100% of the power between the two axles. But unfortunately, at that point, your steering is restricted because the whole vehicle is trying to be pushed forward by this one solid bar. Here in the gearbox, 18 gears, 18 things potentially to go wrong. How long would it take to take the engine and gearbox out in the field?
Well, this gearbox was not designed or made to repair in the field or in off-road conditions or any like this. To repair this gearbox, you need a really equipped workshop and skilled people.
So this might have been called the Achilles heel of the machine.
Yes, it was a weak point, but when it is done proper, you can drive 40, 50,000 kilometers without any problem.
I begin to realize now, potentially, just how difficult this could have been to maintain.
However, lives depended not just on the engineering under the saddle, but on the skill of the riders as well.
As far as I can tell you, there was marvelous bikes, especially if you got into the thick of things, because of the sidecar wheel drive. You couldn't get stuck unless the mud got so thick that that was almost impossible. I've seen times when we pulled cars out of the mud with the motorbike and sidecar.
If it wasn't too much muck, you couldn't beat a bike. They got everything was quicker, a smaller point to see, and was more reliable. Okay, sometimes it was a bit noisy, but when you go out there, noise is there all the time. But in Russia, it was a complete different matter with the bikes. Muck, muck, and muck again. And there you could see the skills of the riders. They really was better than us, you know.
I mean, those machines, when they get in this sort of muck, you must expect trouble with gearboxes, isn't it? This winter when I was there was a mild winter. And instead of getting a good grip, you used to just get down into the quagmire, and half your bike was submerged in mud.
They was crazy at times. They, in my opinion, they sometimes was it show off or showing us the skill, and they had skill. Motorbike riding, anybody can do it, but do it like they did, in bad condition. I think you should take your hat off to them.
Our biggest trouble was not only the mud, but the lack of fuel. We just couldn't keep the bikes running, whatever we had. And eventually they was just blown up because we finished off as a normal fighting unit with no bikes.
As the war progressed, the need for heavy-duty motorbike and sidecar combinations ceased to be a priority for the German military. But 60 years on, Jost Reuter still has a passion for these awesome machines.
Tell me about this bike of yours then, Jost.
Well, I restored this bike with the help of Uli. And I collected parts all over Europe. For example, the sidecar body came from Poland. The tank I found in Spain.
And the colour?
And the color is a typical appearance of a vehicle of the German army for the African campaign.
We went from horse-drawn to the motorcycle. The motorcycle was a cheap form of transport, and then they designed this motorcycle, which was actually hugely expensive and sophisticated.
Yes.
Do you really think that the cost of all this development and production justified the performance that the bike gave in the field?
Not at all, Jim. If you imagine the cost of this bike was value of 2.5 or 3 German Jeeps, the Volkswagen Kübelwagen, then you have the answer.
The original intention had been to build a powerful and versatile machine. But the innovations demanded by the army and the involvement of 2 rival manufacturers raised the costs of producing the KS750 and R75. By the time the bikes were in full production, the nature of the war had changed. Blitzkrieg had ultimately proved to be a high-risk strategy, and by the end of 1943, the German army was in retreat and had given up on the idea of motorcycle fighting units. Its most pressing need was now for vehicles with greater firepower.
The BMW R75 and the Zundap KS750 met the German army's needs for a high-speed motorcycle and sidecar combination that would take 3 men and their equipment almost anywhere on the battlefield. However, all these technical innovations came at an extremely high cost. By 1942, Volkswagen were producing their light, four-wheeled field car for less money and in greater numbers. However, the BMW R75 and the Zundap KS750 with their 2-wheel lockable differentials were still incredible machines and really came to represent the effectiveness of wheels at war.
Na de onderbreking frisse temperaturen, vaak minder fris werk. We gaan onder water in de Londense Theems met de politieduikers van Thames Valley in Diving with the Force.